This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 291 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to KimBoo York all about how to turn serialization into serious business. First, to a comment on YouTube from Matt T. Baluos. I may have mispronounced that. Essentially, Matt says, thank you. Your channel led me to become a writer. I published my first sci-fi or cli-fi novel on March 2024. Thanks for your regular videos. Your channel led me to Joanna Penn, and through her, Sanderson, and all the greats from the greatest of all, George, to King, Stephen, and Queen JK. Thanks. You are my e-guru. You are most welcome. And thank you very much for that lovely comment. In personal news and updates then, I am sick as a dog. So my new team member started in the warehouse, and I don't know if it was relief or what, but essentially she started and I got sick the next day. So I have spent 2 days on the sofa, pretty much not doing anything. The first day I literally didn't move for 8 hours. And yesterday I did much the same. And I'm trying to just accept that it's okay, that we're in the Easter holidays, and that there are a couple of other things happening next week, which I may or may not have forgotten about. So I'm trying not to get myself stressed about timelines and deadlines, and just be like, no, we've got time, there's slippage. We have some slippage time, but I really hate eating into my slippage time just for, sickness. It really... I've never been good at resting. Also, I am shockingly bad at resting. Don't know if this is a news update for you guys. But I sat on the sofa, and by the evening I felt, obviously, look, and I'm not... I'm trying to be very careful when I say this, very small d, but I was kind of depressed by the evening. Like, I was so low and fed up. I was miserable. I really fucking hate sitting still. Like, I can't stand it. I was so bored and so lonely and so just done with sitting in front of the TV, but lo and behold, I did feel mildly better. I still feel pretty shit today, I'm not going to lie. But, supposedly we do have to sit down. Either way, what it has reminded me is that sitting on my ass in front of the TV is not good resting time for me. That is not how I like to rest. So, basically I'm trying to not work too much, even though I need to work loads, and just get through. So, the new team member is in. She has worked this week. It's been fantastic. She's picked up everything really quickly. I couldn't have asked for a better team member, so I'm really excited about that. In the throes of doing all the Kickstarter ordering, so I had a Game of Vows and Vendettas back from the editor this morning. I've done all of the edits, and that has now been sent to the team for formatting and getting ready for publication. We have to turn around the order for China really quickly. We only have until Monday. It is Thursday the 17th of August? What the fuck? Shows how fucked my head is. April. It's the 17th of April as I record this, and so we've got until Monday to turn around all the files, get everything finalized and the order in. Otherwise it won't arrive before I go on holiday, in which case we then have to delay ordering by another 2 or 3 weeks. It has definitely been all go, especially because we're having to put an interim print run order in because we're almost out of stock of the vampire books. I'm trying to start writing Architecty as well. Oh my goodness me. It has just been relentlessly non-stop, which is my happy place, I won't lie, but not when I'm sick. So as this airs, I will then be recording the annual Lessons Learned episode. I'm probably about halfway through having written it. It's always a big chonker, so I am excited for that for next week. Rebel of the week this week is Karla's mum. Karla says, no photo this time of my mother flipping off at the camera, though I have plenty. But this is the story of when she called to say she got a DUI. That year, I was co-teaching it in one of the best school districts in my state, and it was hell. The lead teacher was a bully, the kind who probably peaked in high school and every day felt like survival. My mother, meanwhile, had suffered 2 strokes and moved into full-time care, wheelchair-bound and forbidden her beloved afternoon cocktail. She wasn't a drunk, just a woman who raised 6 kids and liked a whiskey sour to take the edge off. So my brother snuck in flasks, and for Mother's Day I brought her an opaque tumbler, 5 bottles of lemonade and 5 whiskey nips. When you want one, I told her, have an aide get you ice and lemonade. Swish in the nip. Voila, whiskey sour. We stashed the stash discreetly in a drawer. A week later, I was in the hallway with my principal, discussing yet another petty complaint from my co-teacher, when my phone rang. Mum/hot breath hoolihan? I don't know what that means. I just got busted for a DUI, she yelled. The principal stared at me, horrified. Ma, I said calmly. What happened? Nurse Ratched found my stash. I giggled. I'll tell the boys. They'll handle it. I hung up and explained the real story. The principal shook his head, and whatever drama we were discussing vanished. I quit the job at the year's end. For Christmas, my sons gave Mum 5 more nips. When she died a month later, my sister and I cleaned out her room and only found 3. We laughed, knowing she'd enjoyed those cocktails, sneaking joy right up until the end. Ah, I love that so much. What a cheeky ma she was. I absolutely love it. To be Rebel of the Week, you can send in your stories to Becca over on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. New patrons this week, but a big thank you to all of my existing patrons. If you'd like to support the show and get early access to all the episodes, as well as bonus content, like our Poison and Parlay sessions, the next one of which is next week, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I'm joined by KimBoo York. KimBoo is a Gen X elder goth whose primary purpose is to provide a good life for her rescue mutt, Keely Boo, who is perfect and beyond reproach in every way. She is also a librarian, former project manager, and a professional author who wears too many hats and crosses too many genres, including romance, fantasy, and nonfiction. She lives on coffee and hope. Hello and welcome.
Hello. Hi. You read that so beautifully. I should just use that for all my intros from here on out.
I love it. I love that you live on coffee and hope. I feel like we're like soul sisters because that is kind of what I live off as well. I like masquerade around the place like I'm really dead on the inside, and secretly I'm like a meliorist who like loves hoping and being optimistic about absolutely everything.
Pretty much same here. Yep.
Right? Like, but if we can't tell anybody, so let's just pretend this isn't going to go out to the internet. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit about you? What's your journey? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, my journey starts with the bog standard. I always knew I wanted to be a writer as a child. That was more my mother's influence than I think than any natural inclination. But I did grow up being surrounded by storytellers. My parents were very Southern storytellers, Appalachia, that whole tradition of storytelling. So it is in my blood. I got away from it for a long, long time. I think there was always I kept writing stories. I just kind of figured out I was never really going to do anything with them. Just for a lot of reasons. Like a lot of my stories had queer-coded characters. This was in the 90s, right? And they just didn't follow the usual plot lines of the popular stories. I gave up. I retreated, hit some rough spots in my life, and then I rediscovered fan fiction. And I love telling this story because I actually wrote fan fiction when I was a teenager, and that was in the 80s. People, I am old. And so when we wrote fan fiction in the 80s, we did it in spiral bound notebooks. Okay. So this is really going back. But once I got to college, I stopped. I grew up. I don't write that type of thing anymore. I don't do that. I got back into fan fiction around 2007, 2008, and it just opened the floodgates of creativity for me. Which is one reason why I really value fan fiction, and you'll hear me talking about it a lot in my other interviews and in my books and stuff, my nonfiction books, because it really brought me back to writing. It got me in the habit of writing almost every day, got me in the habit of figuring out plots and characters, and then I landed a contract with an indie publisher and got my first original fiction published in 2011. I'm fully independent now. I'm self-published. A lot of steps along that journey, but that's how I got where I am
That's amazing. And
now.
okay, so we're gonna talk about serialization.
Yeah,
Can we just address the elephant in the room of the last month or so? I don't quite remember when it happened. Let's talk about Vela before we talk about anything else.
sure.
Would
Yeah.
you explain what Vela is, what it was, what it's going to be?
Well, it's not going to be anything. So, so Vela came onto the scene a few years ago. It is a serialization platform that was run by Amazon. So if you're familiar with Kindle Unlimited or Kindle Publishing, then you are in the same ecosystem as Vela was designed to be in. Vela was taking its cues from Radish, from Wattpad, from a lot of online manga, comics platforms, in that readers would pay coins or pay a certain fee, and then they could get access to certain chapters written by different authors. So when it launched, which I think was not like 5 years ago, 2019, it drew in immediately a lot of authors in the romance genre. And it did pretty well. It was not a bad platform. Like you'll hear a lot of people talking shit about Vela. I never used it myself, but I know a lot of authors who did, and some of them made real bank on it. So you won't hear me bad mouthing it, but you will hear me bad mouthing Amazon stakeholders because they did not nurture the program. They didn't respond to what readers were asking for, what authors were asking for. To me, it is one of those things where they just pulled a Google, which is my phrase in the IT industry. When you pull a Google, you're throwing something at the wall to see if it sticks. And it didn't stick enough for Amazon to keep investing and putting money in it. So they recently, a month ago, 2 months ago, announced that it would be shutting down permanently. And so we have a lot of authors, particularly romance authors, although there were other genres on Vela, that was the predominant genre on it, who are scrambling and trying to figure out what to do next. So that's the state of Vela as it is.
So I read a book. Oh goodness, and now I'm going to forget her name. I think it was like Nikki St. Sloan or Clone or Crow.
Mm,
Crow.
mm.
I think it was Crow. It was like the like Netflix and chill vampire fiction. I couldn't put the fucking thing down. Like I didn't read it on Vela because we didn't get access here, but I read it once it was
Right.
compiled. Oh my
Hmm.
fucking God. People who write serialization know how to write crack. That's all they're
Hmm.
doing. They're just
Hmm.
writing crack.
Hmm.
So let's talk about what serialization is. Like what are the talk to me about what it is, what it looks like, and what some of the different formats can look like. Like where can you get it? Where can we read this stuff?
Oh, it's so many different places. Like this is not 2012 when I was first thinking about trying to do serialization a long time ago, or when I was doing fan fiction serialization, right? Totally different beast. There are lots of platforms these days. There's the new kid on the block, Ream, again, predominantly romance, but they are your source, especially for spicy romance and more erotica driven romance. They've got a lot of authors have moved over there, including one of my favorites, Elizabeth Wheatley. Um, excuse me. So if you like fantasy or lit RPG, there's Royal Road. There's a little bit of romance on Royal Road, but it is mostly fantasy, some science fiction, and lit RPG. Massive on that platform. There is Radish. It's still around. Vela, not so much. It's off the list. There is a growing number of writers who are moving to Substack. And Substack right now actually has a lot of more literary authors on it and historical fiction writers. There's a bunch of science fiction authors who are launching on Substack. So it's a good place, I think, if you're trying to get your foot in the door as an author. As a reader, you're going to just find a lot of variety on Substack, which I think is good personally. It just depends on what you're looking for.
Uh,
There's the old fallback Wattpad. Wattpad's still predominantly viewed as a romance platform, but there are a lot of different genres on Wattpad. It really outgrew the romance only framework years ago, just people don't know it yet. So those are some of the places that readers can go and that writers can invest in and look at and see if it's a good platform for them.
Okay, so like I have downloaded one book from AO3.
Mm, mm,
I am not on Ream. I'm
okay.
not, I couldn't access Avella. I've never used Royal Road. I've never used Wattpad. So, as a complete idiot to all of these like systems,
Uh,
how do you read on them? Like what is because obviously I'm like so um like basic bitch used to Kindle delivering me an ebook into my app or onto my Kindle Scribe or Paperwhite or
right.
whatever.
Hmm.
How does one read on these websites? What is it? Do they make it into a Kindle? What is it like?
So for these websites, they're mostly apps. So you would get the Wattpad app, you get the Royal Road app, you would get Inkit is the one I was trying to remember. Inkit has an app that you can use on your phone. You can access them through your browser. I spend a lot of time on my computer, big screen tower, so I spend a lot of time reading there. Wattpad has an app. Um, Ream has an app. It's still in development, a little bit glitchy. Like I said, they're the new kid on the block, but it's there. So, and it's kind of like the same. It sounds like you're not involved in the manga scene much, are you? It's like, no. So, anybody who's familiar with manga would understand from like webtoons or
Oh yeah, I've
web
heard of that
comics.
one though.
Right. Similar idea. There's an app, you load the app, you put in, you fire it up, you go in and you put in your preferences. I want dark, mafia, romance, happy ending. And then it'll show you a bunch of stories. Usually of course, it's a little bit algorithm driven, so they'll show you the most popular ones first. And then you'll just look through it's kind of like scrolling on Kindle. You'll find one that you like. Sometimes they're completed, sometimes they're still in process, still posting, and then you just start reading on the app. So it's pretty straightforward once you get into it. Be careful, it can be really addictive.
That's hilarious. I've, funnily enough, one of my, well, not one of, my work wife has been in a huge fan fiction era this year, reading tons
Uh,
and tons and tons of it. So I completely understand the addiction from her
mhm.
perspective. I am partway through like a fan fiction of the series that shall not be named, and the most famous fan fiction of that, but it's like 1,200 pages long. So I've read like
Yeah.
20% and I've like just not read any more since. I will because it's great, but it's so long. And I'm like a really fast-paced, short kind of so actually in a way kind of more attuned to serialized fiction because it is so
Mm,
hooky and like fast-paced. But
yep.
let's talk about it more in terms of like the craft and structure. So
Mm.
like talk to me about the differences in terms of craft between a serial and novel.
So I do want to state very, very upfront because some people tend to get this blurred a little bit. A serial and a novel are formats. Serialization is a process. So you can serialize a novel. You can serialize a short story. You can serialize a novella. You can serialize an epic poem. It doesn't matter what it is, it can be serialized, which means you can send it out as an email, like if it's a newsletter, or post it on a website or a blog in installments over the course of time. That is serialization. A serial versus a novel is comparing two different formats of writing. So a novel is the one we all know. There's a plot arc, whether it's Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey or Romancing the Beat, and you have the characters and they may have different character arcs all the way through it, but you have this one plot arc. Sometimes it's very long, it can go over 3 books, but it's still got this one plot arc. A serial shares a lot in common with a novel, obviously, but it has multiple overlapping plot arcs. And that is really the difference. I think there are some people who get confused because they think of book series, right? And they're like, well, is this book series a serial? And I'm like, well, oftentimes they are. These are not hard and fast definitions, but they are useful definitions for you as an author to understand what the big picture is and what you're trying to create. If you're trying to create a novel, you're going to stick with one plot arc. you're going to stick to those beats, and you're going to stick the landing, right? And then you've got a novel. You've got what I call them the clamshell. Like you shut the clamshell, that's the book. In a serial, you've got all these moving pieces and you've got these overlapping plot arcs to build upon each other for as long as you want them to go. As you said, one of the fan fictions you're reading is 300,000 words. One of the longest running serials online is called The Wandering Inn. It has 11 million words. So, I know.
What?
I know.
What? Oh my
I
God.
was doing research for my book and I read that number and I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. I can't do that.
11 million. That's
11
like more than
million.
some people publish in their whole career.
Right? I've been publishing for years. I've maybe hit 2 million at this point, maybe. And I'm 54 years old and been writing all my life. It's like, what? I don't, some people are machines. Like, this is like, but
How could there
the,
be that much story about?
well, see, that's where the overlapping plot arcs come in. Because if you're thinking of, but how can there be that much story? Then you're thinking in novel terms. Thinking there's going to be a story. In a serial, there's going to be multiple stories told, which is why a lot of people think of series, oftentimes, like especially romance series, set in a hometown, right? Think of that. And they still write them as novels, so I wouldn't call them true serials. But the thread is you've got this thing going on over time with these different characters, and maybe your main characters come in and out through those stories. I think a really, really good example of a written serial, and I know it's been published as novels, but is Lord of the Rings. To me, that is a very good serial because what you have, even though you have this single massive overlapping plot arc of get the ring to the volcano and drop it in, right? There are a lot of different plot arcs that go on underneath that umbrella. And those plot arcs keep the plot moving through all the books. So it really does depend on how you're looking at the story. But if you've got overlapping plot arcs that can go on, I mean, it's like television series that supernatural. Like it can just keep going forever. It'll never stop. So it
I
can
think,
stop. I don't want to get people to feel too overwhelmed, but you can keep it going until you lose interest in it rather than, oh, the plot arc is over. We've reached the end and now it's over.
yeah, I find it really interesting because I am a romance writer. So for me, once the romance comes to fruition, that's it, the story's over.
Right,
So it's
right.
really hard for me to think about story where that's not the case because even when I wrote young adult fantasy, I actually was still writing romance. So like
Yeah.
I just didn't realize that that's what I was doing until I learned more about the market and the industry. But I've always written romance. Like I've literally always been a romance writer. And actually, ironically, always fantasy romance as well,
Mm,
because my YA was fantasy. Anyway, so for me, it's really hard to like understand. I mean, I suppose it's like the Jim Butcher Dresden File type,
yes.
right? Where there's, but I
Hmm.
mean, even there, it's a story because it's a case start and finish, you know. So yeah, it boggles me a little bit. Um, I mean, I guess like are on running TV shows serials, like in the way that
Yes,
Grey's
absolutely.
Anatomy?
Yes. So
Okay.
Grey's Anatomy is a really good example. And I talk about that in my book on writing serials about how television shows really, really nail this. So, for instance, you have the long running, the whole show itself, all of Grey's Anatomy. And then you have the seasons. And usually in a season, they'll have an overarching plot line that kind of threads its way through all the episodes. And yet each episode stands on its own. There might be some kind of cliffhanger at the end, some unresolved issue that's going to carry you into the next episode. But that is a very, very good format to have. So for romance series, if you wanted to make it into a serial, it doesn't mean you have to use the same characters over and over again. Like you said, like they've got their romance, they got their happy ending. Yeah, what do you do that from there? But if you start overlapping the next story earlier, right? You start interweaving the set, like if you have it set in a fantasy village, right? Or a fantasy castle. You got this noble family of witches, right? And they're the rulers of the kingdom. And you've got all these brothers and these sisters, and they're finding their loves of their lives. Well, if you keep interweaving those stories where this next story, instead of just, oh, story one is over, now let's go to story two, I introduce the characters in story one so people know who they are in story two. You actually start story two before story one ends, then you've got yourself a serial.
Okay, that's interesting to me because I have two different series under my Ruby name, and
Mm-hmm.
my Hearts and Heist series was interconnected standalones,
Mm-hmm.
but the the end of like the first book set up very clearly who the protagonist and love interest was for book two. So I feel like it's not a serial, but like it definitely has some elements of in
Yeah.
that because the characters are there and um the my cats are being horrendous this evening in their usual fashion. It's extremely distracting. Yeah, okay, cool. So let's talk about like one of the so I mentioned the Nikki St. Crow one earlier,
Mm-hmm.
which was like this vampire popcorn thing that I just devoured. Also because it was smutty, obviously I devoured it. Um but what one thing that Nikki did really fantastically was she wrote super short and she had these really brilliant hooks at the end of each chapter. So, or not, I shouldn't. Is it a chapter? Is it still a chapter?
It, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules. I tend to call them installments, but they're chapters. Like if when I take my serials and I publish them, then those installments are chapters. So there's really just mock sticks.
Okay, I mean, even when we write a more classic novel, we still need
Mm,
to be good at hooks. But like, I
yes.
feel like it is the gift of serial fiction that they really are exceptional at hooks. So, like, what lessons have you learned about creating killer hooks to kind of hook people into that next scene, that next chapter?
I think the biggest breakthrough I had personally, and the one I usually talk about, is that a cliffhanger doesn't have to be an exciting someone's tied to the train tracks type of scene. It can be an internal revelation, and we've all seen that television show where somebody they realize that the person they've been dating is actually the villain, right? Fade to black. Tune in next week. And so that's a cliffhanger, even though it's not people endangerment and running around and a lot of action. So cliffhangers and these hooks that you're talking about can be a lot of different things. It's really how you set it up. And I think a lot of people think they need to get to the end of the story, the end of the installment or the chapter and put a hook in. Really, here's my advice. If you're going to set up a hook, it needs to be set up and the gears need to be moving in the middle of the chapter. Because by the time you get to the end of the chapter, you need your readers invested in that hook. Just having a hook, just leaving them on the hanging over the side of a cliff, that's kind of a hook. But leaving over if you set it up that they're hanging over the side of the cliff and nobody's coming from them, and that I don't know, the pterodactyl dragons, whatever, are coming to eat them. Well, you have all these different threads feeding into that hook. I think if you really want to study hooks, and I don't mean to be, I know this is going to be controversial. I understand that. Read Dan Brown. Read Dan Brown, read the Da Vinci Code. Just if you hate Dan Brown, swallow your pride. If you love Dan Brown, go have a fun reread. But really look at how he did hooks, because that is why his books sold in the millions. It wasn't because he was making great literary breakthroughs. It's because when you got to the end of a chapter, you couldn't stop. And Dan Brown mastered that. And so if you look at somebody like that, or like your example, you look at the hooks that she had with that vampire story, you'll see that in the middle of the chapter, that hook was already being built up to towards the end.
Yeah, Dan Brown's a great example. I am not really a thriller reader, but when I think I think it must have been when the Da Vinci Code came out. I went and read it, and then I read all of the other three books that he had out at
Right?
the same time. Like I can't remember they were like digital something, angels and demons,
Digital Citadel, I think. Yeah. Oh,
Fortress,
yeah. Digital Fortress.
and then what
Okay.
was the other one? There was a fourth
Angels and
one.
Demons. I think that was it.
That
Yeah.
yeah, that's only three. So what was the fourth?
Oh,
There was
I don't
another
know.
one. I can't remember. Anyway,
Okay.
I read all of them, and then I was like, oh, by the time I'd read four, because I like binged them and read them back to back, I was like,
Hmm.
these are a bit samey now. But still, you can't put them down. Like it was really frustrating. I just couldn't. And they are not small books.
Mm-mm.
Like they're really long books.
I
Um,
actually went in because when I was younger, I was very much a snob, and so Dan Brown was favorite. Everybody's reading Dan Brown, and so I was like, fine, I guess I'll read Dan Brown. I'll see what the fuss is. And I went in there because it's not a genre I normally read. I'd heard terrible things about the writing from my other writer friends, and I was like totally expecting to hate this book, and like you, nope, couldn't put it down. Just was like, and that's when I realized like there's something about the hooks in his books. Like if you look at him, like I said, if you look at him, he's not just dropping you off the cliff. He's really setting it up in the middle of the chapter, if not earlier, to leave you hanging by the end of it, even if it's just a discussion over tea. Like
mm.
it's amazing. Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about the emotional through line as well. Like
Hmm.
sometimes an emotional hook is even greater than the
Yes.
we keep saying hanging off the cliff, like that as an example. Sometimes I feel like those emotional hooks are absolute killers. Um,
Yeah.
like kind of along the same lines, but slightly different in terms of craft. How one of the things that I heard spoken about, because obviously I didn't have access to Vella, was that the scenes in Vella needed to be around like 1,500 words, which
Right.
is technically shorter than what I probably average between. Probably on average, I write 2,000 word chapter, but sometimes in my fantasy romance, they will go up as high as four. Um, which is obviously considerably longer than a 1,500 word chapter. And I think that
Hmm.
was one of the things that made me keep like consuming the Nikki St. Croix one. But how do you do that? Because I don't often find myself able to write that short.
So I think it's a training thing. I think a lot of times it's just like, before the recording started, we talked about, getting our brains in training to do podcasts, right? It's a learning curve. Writing stories of a particular length is a skill set. I often tell people I suck at short stories. Like I'm good at writing 15 to 2000, 1,500 to 2,000 word chapters, but at short stories, oh, I just haven't practiced it enough. I don't think it's a statement of my innate ability. It's just not something I do a lot. That said, I think one of the things that a lot of authors who are used to writing novels kind of lean into is knowing that the person is sitting down there and going to just be wandering along with you. If you know you're writing a serial and you know the installment's going to be happening, you're going to be mentally looking for that break. You're going to be mentally looking for, is this a point where I can pause and leave the reader hanging to get them to the next one, to the next scene? And sometimes that's interrupting, stopping in the middle of dinner, so to speak. It doesn't have to be this big transition scene as we're used to from television and from book series and things like that. It can be a quieter moment, but if you still left a lot of things unresolved, then you can leave it there between 1,500 and 2,000 words and pick it up in the next chapter, and people will still be coming with you along the journey.
Hmm. Let's talk about marketing because
Mm,
I have always felt in a weird way, like the fan fiction community is quite closed off or like hard to access. If you don't know, you don't know. It's one of those sort
right,
of
yeah.
like if you're
Hmm.
in the know, then you know how to access it all. Whereas for me, I'm like, there's all these new fangled websites and kind of apps and things. And I'm like, I had no idea that's how you read on these websites. Um, so how do you market serialized fiction? Because I don't feel like you can market it in the same way because people aren't accessing it in the same way. So how do you market a serialized novel, fiction?
Well, I will be totally honest with you and say that that is something that's still developing. And in the sense of because the technology has shifted to such a degree that serializing fiction is becoming more mainstream, we're still testing those boundaries. I do know some serial fiction writers, especially in the romance genre, but also in science fiction, who've done really well with Facebook ads. I wouldn't have tagged Facebook ads as a great source for serialization marketing, but they've made killer bank using Facebook ads. So there's just a lot of unknowns. I know that a popular one that people say, like, build a funnel, like post for free on Wattpad, and then, direct people to your site and, start charging subscriptions or, direct them to a platform site. And that was true 8 years ago. It's not as true now when there's so many free reading options. And yes, I include AO3, the fan fiction platform, Wattpad, Inkit, Railroad Road. You can read a lot for free on those platforms. So I'm not sure that those platforms are as good marketing tools as they used to be. So that still leaves a lot of leeway on how you're going to get the word out. Substack is there's pros and cons, so I'm not this isn't a full-throated approval of Substack. I know people have their criticisms of it, but one of the things they've got is organic natural growth. Now it's a closed garden, but it is growing very fast. So there's still a lot of ways for people to have free levels and then paid levels on there to attract people in. There are newsletters. A lot of people are managing to leverage their newsletters, which they grow from the back of their books. I'm sure you probably have the same. We all do. Who doesn't? Like, we all have newsletters. That's what we're supposed to do. But use that as a leverage to pull people into serialization platforms, whether on their own site or someplace like Ream. They use their newsletter. They give away, behind the scenes stuff or cut scenes or prologues or epilogues on their newsletter and then draw people into their platform. Like I said, there's still a lot of growth to be had in the serialization world for authors, and so I'm not sure that there's any one correct answer. I will say that for a lot's going to depend on genre. I was just talking to a lit RPG author, and the lit RPG model right now is you post for free on Royal Road, and then you send people to your Patreon. And that's just what lit RPG readers are used to. Trying to break that model, you're not going to get a lot of traction. And, he was trying to break that model. He was trying to do something different and he just wasn't getting traction. The minute he switched to putting everything free on Royal Road and then directing rabid readers to his Patreon, he started getting paid followers. So there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of growth pains going on there. But I think you really need to look at your genre, look at where the readers are, and then maybe take a few risks along the way. Like I said, those Facebook ads, if you'd asked me and saying, should I do Facebook ads for serialization? We're like, no way, that'll never work. And it's worked bonkers. So what do I know?
Um, okay, so you mentioned Patreon in there, which is one
Mm,
way to make money. You
sure.
also mentioned that a lot of people are putting stuff up for free.
Mm.
So what, and we know that Vela has gone. So what are the key ways to make money with serialized fiction?
So the tried and true method is to have tiers. If you read on Ream, if you read on Patreon, um, there's some of this going on Substack, less so. A lot of people have the same thing on their own personal websites, whether that's through WordPress or um, Fourth Wall or whatever. There's a lot of options there. You have tiers. You have a free tier, and that is either older fiction or it's like there's different models for this, honestly. Like I could do a deep dive on just all the different ways you can structure tiers, but the idea is there's a free tier, there's a low level tier, and then there's a super fans tier. Chris Hopper, who is a science fiction author, he hosts everything on his own, I believe it's Wix or Squarespace, one of those sites, and he's got a beautiful site. He has levels that go all the way from like five free, where you just get really old fiction that and new chapters of new stuff that then gets locked down. He's got a few smaller tiers, $5, $10, $20. His tiers go up to $1,000 a month. Right.
What on earth
Like
are they getting for $1,000 a month?
they're getting swag. They're getting swag and they're getting like webinar style phone calls. Like he'll do a Zoom meeting for just all of his $1,000 supporters, of which there's probably less than 20 at this point. Last time I checked, there were only about 10. And they're paying to get all this swag, free hard copies of every new book, t-shirts. he's got this gold coin. No, it's not real gold, but like this, like a poker chip. That's what it is. It's a poker chip. He has special edition poker chips because poker plays a big game in his stories. And depending on the tier, you get this different special editions. The $1,000 ones get, like I said, they get to talk to him personally on a Zoom call once a month. There is even higher tiers than that, and those people get to have a live convention with him once a year. So,
That
it's
is wild to me.
right.
I
That
would
is wild
hate
to me
that.
too. I
I
would not like it.
literally can't think of anything worse than doing that.
He's
Um,
an extrovert. I don't,
that
yeah,
explains
yeah.
everything. Okay,
But the
cool.
point I'm making is that he's created these tiers based on what he's comfortable with and what he knows he can produce. So
Mm,
the free draws people in, the lower levels keep people interested and help hook in super fans. And once he gets some super fans, man, the sky's the limit. Like you giving away special edition hardbound copies to super fans based on a tier where they're paying $100 to $150 a month, which a lot of romance authors are doing with their tiers. They're doing pretty well with that.
yeah, that's wild. I mean, you'd have to have enough books to be able to warrant doing that month on month on month. So that's partly about backlist as well,
It's
I
partly
think.
about backlists and it's partly about production. Like the historical fiction, and I mean historical fiction, not historical romantic fiction, but actual historical fiction authors I know. In that genre, putting out a book a year is considered fast. Like
Mm,
that genre is used to slow releases. So the question is, what are those readers going to want for tiers on a serialization level? Like giving away special edition hardbacks of all your backlist with your backlist is maybe two books, then that's not very helpful. But what you can do is you can think about things like travel guides. If it's historical fiction, you can write up a digital or printed travel guide to the area where your stories are set. You can do special education, TED Talk style things that only your followers on Patreon at a certain tier or above will get to access to. So sometimes you have to be a little bit creative if you want to try to get to these higher tier levels, and a lot depends on the genre and your productivity level, but it's not impossible.
mm. Okay, last question before I ask you the ultimate podcast question.
Uh-oh.
What mistakes do you see authors making when they approach serializing fiction or serial fiction, either or? Because
Yeah,
obviously you've
yeah,
made a
no,
difference in different
right,
definition.
yeah, but I think the problem is exactly the same, which is not doing it. Like a lot of authors will think about, oh, I'd really love to get into that and do that. Oh, but it's the consistency and this and that, and I don't know what I charge, and I don't know what platform to use, um, and I say that because I see a lot of these authors doing this, and it's what I did about almost 10 years ago. Like I really started looking at serialization in 2014. And really, the only place to do it back then, if you didn't host your own website and do everything DIY on WordPress, was Patreon. And I didn't like Patreon. It didn't hit all the right buttons for me. And then I was concerned, am I going to be able to keep up with the consistency? And the authors I know who just went ahead and did it anyway have much advanced in their careers much faster, have made more money, but also have gotten to where they want to be in their career because they took that chance. So if you're considering about serializing your fiction, I would say do it. Like what, like at the worst comes to worst, and I have known authors who've done this, you serialize for 6 months, you realize it's not for you, it's not the model you want to have in your business plan, you pull everything down and you just go back to publishing books. No harm, no foul. Like there's no downside to it. But you don't know if you don't try.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast.
Oh
So
no.
tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
So fair warning, audience members. She did send this question in advance. I've had a little time to think about it, and I thought of a lot of different things. But I think the one thing for me that was the most rebellious moment, it happened not too long ago, a few years ago, was to realize that doing it the way everybody else is doing it was not serving me. Again, especially when I got into it, the rapid release model was really strong. It still is. Right to market, great advice. If you can write to market, that's good. I'm terrible at writing to market. For me, the biggest rebellion I've made in my author career is instead of trying to write to an audience, I want to write to my audience. And that may be a very small slice of the pie, but that's okay because those are the people who are going to pay me. They're going to support me. They're going to encourage me. They're going to give me that same feel, that same high that I get, honestly, when I write fan fiction. It's because it's a community. It's people who are supporting me and doing what I want to do. So to me, that was a huge rebellion. It may not sound like a big rebellion to other people, but as a mindset shift, it was a huge rebellion because I tend to be a little bit of a gifted child perfectionist syndrome. Like, oh, there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and you got to do it the right way. And I realized I need to do it my way.
Oh no, I love that. I think it almost comes back to that heart versus market kind of, debate
Mm-hmm.
that we always hear in the community.
I would
But I
like to
love that.
add to that I so I'm also a text technology historian. So I study the development of text technology through history, right? And one of the things I think is very true is I would not be able to make that statement or that commitment without the technology being where it is right now. I mean, there are 8 billion people in the world. Surely a few thousand will want to read my work, right? That was not something we would have been able to access 20, 25 years ago. So the technology is really feeding into this, what I consider to be a revolution for authors to really follow their heart to find their audience rather than trying to find the audience first and write to them. Not saying either way is wrong. I'm just saying both options are on the table.
Yeah, I always talk about how I feel like we have more opportunity now than we've ever
Hmm.
had.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
definitely.
amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. Would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your serial fiction, and anything else that you want to add?
Sure thing. My hub, my online home is houseofyork.info. It's all one word, houseofyork.info. And that is my personal website, my author website. It has links to my fiction, my nonfiction. I do write other craft books, including books on discovery writing, serial fiction. I have a book coming out called Out from Fan Fiction, which is geared to writers who've been writing fan fiction but want to start writing original fiction. That'll be coming out in January. And also my own podcast and my serial fiction. I have a serial nonfiction site, which is the Scriptorium, and I have a serial fiction site, which is called the Biblioteca. And both of those are linked from my home base website, and you can find out all about. I'm leaning more into uh, fantasy adventure with romance, tends polyamorous romance. So that tends to be where I'm living these days with my genre.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's listeners and all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to KimBoo York, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, there is no guest because it is my annual Lessons Learned episode, and it's going to be a juicy one. So join me next week for that. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.